How does the greatest car designer alive build the slowest car on the grid? That is the question hanging over Aston Martin right now, because Adrian Newey's first season here has produced exactly 1 point. Then, on a quiet filming day at the Hungary, Honda fires up a brand new engine and drops it into the car for the very first time. It has never turned a competitive lap. Its debut is Zandvoort in 3 weeks, and the man watching it closest is not Newey. It is a driver who just told the entire paddock he is not going anywhere. Because all season, behind the bad results, Aston Martin has been quietly building 2 upgrades and holding them back. The first has already hit the track. The second, the one fired up on that filming day, has not raced yet. Bolt both onto the car at the same time, and this stops being the team stuck at the back of the grid. That is what Zandvoort is really about, and it is worth understanding exactly what is coming. Newey started work on this car months late, and Honda's first year back as a full-works engine builder went badly, with vibrations and reliability failures that stopped the car finishing races early on. A late car and a troubled engine is how the best designer in the sport ends up second from last. But that is not the point of this story. The point is the answer he has been building, and it comes in 2 parts. The first part landed in Hungary, the last race before the summer break, and it was a gamble the whole season had been building toward. Instead of drip-feeding small updates race by race, the way almost every other team operates, Aston Martin held everything back and brought it all at once. 16 new parts in a single package. It is close to a new car from the floor up, the first real version of what Newey actually wants the AMR26 to be, rather than the flawed thing it started the year as. And it was a genuine risk. Every week the team spent not updating the car was a week it slipped further back, and it accepted all of that on a single bet. That one big correct step was worth more than a dozen small ones. A single package this large is a rare move in a modern season. Almost no team would dare skip that many races of updates, because slipping further behind in the meantime can wreck a whole season on its own. Aston Martin decided the deficit was already so deep that half measures were pointless. If the car was going to be fixed at all, it had to be fixed properly, and all in one go. And for the first time all season, the stopwatch answered. Alonso dragged the car into the second part of qualifying, his best Saturday of the entire year, on the kind of circuit where the team had been nowhere for months. On Sunday he finished 14th. Lance Stroll brought the other car home 13th, ahead of a Cadillac, a Williams, a Haas and an Alpine. Not one of those results scores a point. But 4 cars that had been beating Aston Martin all season suddenly finished behind it, and that is the number that matters. The team said it flatly afterward. The upgrade works. They were finally racing other people again, instead of just surviving at the back. And the reason that result matters so much is not the finishing position. It is what it proves. For half a season, nobody knew whether this car was slow because the concept was wrong or because it simply was not finished. Hungary answered that. The moment the real parts went on, the car climbed. The idea underneath it is sound. Newey did not design a bad car, he designed an unfinished one, and the team just watched the first finished piece of it work. So that is half the weapon, proven on track. A chassis that can climb the order the second it gets the parts it was always meant to have. But a fast chassis can only do so much on its own, and everyone inside the team knows exactly what is still holding the whole thing down. Because the 16 parts in Hungary could not touch the one thing that has been the real problem all year. The engine. All season, the honest read across the paddock is that Honda sits at the very bottom of the engine order, and there is now a hard number on it. The sport's governing body runs a private assessment of every manufacturer, grading how far each one sits behind the strongest engine on the grid. That ranking puts Red Bull's own operation on top, Mercedes second, and the works Honda at the foot of the order, far enough back to fall into the very bottom bracket. Even Lewis Hamilton, from inside a Ferrari, lays the order out exactly the same way. The engine Aston Martin bet its entire future on is handing power to every car it lines up against, and no amount of clever bodywork can hide a deficit that lives inside the engine itself. And this is where it turns. Being the worst engine on the grid is the very thing that earns Honda the largest development allowance in the entire sport. The rules hand the manufacturers furthest behind extra tokens to change parts that are normally frozen for the whole season, and extra money on top of the budget cap to spend chasing the leaders. The idea is to let the stragglers catch up, and right now the biggest straggler is Honda by a distance. And that allowance is not a token gesture. The manufacturers grouped at the bottom are handed the most development tokens and the largest slice of extra spending, precisely so they are not frozen out of the fight for years at a time. For Honda, it means it can attack parts of the engine that its rivals are simply not allowed to touch until the rules reset again. It is the one real advantage of being last. and Honda is spending every bit of it in a single shot. So the same weakness that dragged Aston Martin to the back becomes its license to rebuild the engine faster than anyone in front of it is even allowed to. Newey can shape the car around the engine. He cannot build the engine. That is Honda's job, and Honda has been unusually blunt about what is coming. There is no magic, they say, no catching Mercedes or Red Bull in a single leap. But a serious step is on the way, and it is aimed straight at the combustion chamber, the space at the heart of the unit where fuel actually burns and power is actually made. Change the shape of that, and you change how much the engine produces everywhere on the track. That step is the second upgrade, and it is the one this entire season has quietly been pointing at. Which brings both halves to the same filming day at the Hungary. In the final days of July, where Honda ran the upgraded engine for the very first time, bolted into the AMR26 on a private shakedown, with limited mileage, no competitive laps, no rivals to measure against, just a first fire and a check that it survives. And for a team whose year began with engines that would not last a race distance, that quiet run mattered far more than it sounds. The unit fired, it ran, and it held together. The reliability that failed them at the start of the year gets confirmed before the engine ever faces a competitor. It looks like a small thing on paper, a private run on an empty track with no times that count, but it clears the exact hurdle that wrecked the first half of the season, the engine simply lasting, and it clears it with weeks to spare before the car has to race for real. Its real debut, the first lap that actually counts, is the Dutch Grand Prix. So here is what actually arrives at Zandvoort, and it is worth being exact about it. This is not a magic bullet that drops the car onto the front row. Honda has said as much itself. What it is the single biggest change to the weakest part of this car, arriving at the exact moment the chassis is finally working. The combustion step should bring real lap time, and it brings it in the place the car has been losing most, the straights, where a down-on power engine bleeds tenths on every single lap. Fix that, and every corner the new chassis already handles well suddenly connects to a straight the car is no longer slow on. The two upgrades do not simply add up, they multiply. A good chassis with a weak engine is a car that looks quick in the corners and gets swallowed on the straights. Close the power gap, and for the first time the whole lap works together. Honda has not promised the world from it. Its own engineers have set the expectation carefully. A reasonable and sizable step, rather than a jump to the front. Something that should show up as clear lap time rather than a miracle. But a clear step, landing on a car that has finally started working underneath it, is exactly the kind of change that drags a team off the back of the grid and into a real fight. If you want the detail behind the results, the part most channels skip straight past, subscribe. GridScope breaks down the story behind the story every week. And the engine is not even arriving alone. More aerodynamic updates are confirmed for Zandvoort on top of it, with further steps already lined up for Monza and Baku after that. The development that stalled for the entire first half of the season is about to come in a wave, race after race, while the rest of the midfield is limited to the same slow trickle everyone else gets. Zandvoort, then Monza, then Baku, 3 upgrade steps inside a handful of races. Teams that develop that aggressively usually do it because they can. Aston Martin does it because it has to, and because being last is the one position the rules actually reward with the freedom to move this fast. So for the first time all year, both halves land together. In Hungary, the chassis got fixed. At Zandvoort, the engine finally gets its answer, and the complete car shows up at full strength on the very same weekend. That has not happened once all year. Every race so far, something has been missing, either the chassis or the engine or the reliability to lean on either. Zandvoort is the first time the car Newey actually designed, running the engine Honda actually intended, races as one finished machine. And when that happens, the targets stop being symbolic, not Cadillac. The brand new team Aston Martin has already left behind, but the midfield cars just up the road, the Williams, the Haas, the Alpines and the Racing Bulls that have spent the season banking the points Aston has not. Those teams do not get the catch-up allowance Honda does. They are largely locked into the cars they already have. Aston Martin is the one team at the very back with a brand new engine and the biggest development budget in the sport arriving at the same moment. Close the gap, and those midfield cars are suddenly in range, and it is those teams that should be looking over their shoulder for the rest of the season. And momentum in this sport compounds. A team that starts scoring collects more data, more confidence, and more reason to keep pushing its development, while the teams it passes start glancing backward instead of forward. The closing stretch of a season rewards whoever is improving fastest, and nobody on the grid has more room left to improve than the team that spent the first half of the year at the very bottom of it, which is exactly where the driver comes in, because none of this is happening in a vacuum. Fernando Alonso is 44 years old. His contract runs to the end of this season, and the sport has spent months quietly asking whether he signs another one. And Newey has tied his own answer directly to these upgrades. He does not talk about the Zandvoort package as pure engineering. He frames it around Alonso. He has said Alonso is genuinely excited about it, and that if it performs, he hopes to keep him in the cockpit for another season. But he adds the condition that matters. Alonso wants to see clear, tangible progress, proof the team is moving decisively in the right direction. Deliver that, Newey believes, and Alonso stays, falls short, and the calculation changes. Alonso himself waves off the idea that he is going anywhere at all. He has a contract, he says, so he is not moving. And that is the part worth understanding, because the real question was never whether he jumps to a rival team. It is whether the fastest 44-year-old in the sport still wants to keep doing this, or whether he steps back into a different kind of role once his current deal runs out. A car that finally works pulls him towards staying in the seat. A car that stays slow makes walking away a great deal easier to justify. So the package landing at Zandvoort is not just Aston Martin's answer to the rest of the grid. It is Newey's argument to his own driver, made in carbon fiber and horsepower, instead of words. And Alonso has made it clear he is watching the stopwatch, not the promises. He has heard optimistic talk before, at more than one team across a long career. What he has not seen this season is a car that actually backs the talk up. Zandvoort is the first weekend that has a real chance to. So here is where it all lands. 2 upgrades built in the dark across a broken season, a chassis that has already proven it can climb, and an engine about to race for the first time that decides how high it goes, all arriving together on one weekend. Newey has poured his recovery, and maybe the last great argument of his career, into 3 weeks and 1 circuit on the Dutch coast. And there is a symmetry to where it happens, because this is the final Dutch Grand Prix. Zandvoort drops off the calendar after this year, and it goes out running the sprint format, 2 races in 1 weekend, which means even more track time to put the new engine under real pressure and even more points on the table to grab. The track that handed the sport back its orange wall of a home crowd gets one last race, and Aston Martin turns up to it with everything it has spent the season building strapped to the car for the very first time. If the engine does what Honda thinks it can, this team walks into the back half of the year climbing instead of drowning. And Alonso gets the exact reason he says he needs. If it does not, the questions get a great deal louder, and the patience runs a great deal shorter. So which is it going to be? The waiting ends the moment the engine finally races. And right now, nobody in the paddock is looking anywhere else.